Hi, I'm Brent Weeks, the author of a couple of books. This is the July Q&A. This month I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on some writing advice kind of questions and maybe writing business if we get that far. I tend to offer fulsome answers. So I'm going to try not to do that too much, but still hit a few nice questions. These questions tend to be pretty involved, so most of them are a little longer, but we're going to start with one that is a little small. Jennifer Webb asks, how many characters are modeled after real people, for good and ill? And what's your favorite hunting spots for random characters? I've only modeled one character specifically after a real person, and that was Miyamoto Musashi. Was a real person, 16th or sorry, 17th century Japanese samurai, and I modified him a bit and modeled Lantano Garawashi in the Night Angel series trilogy. Sorry, I get a series after him. Sometimes what I do is I will model individual traits after from people that I know. So I have met three friends actually over the course of my life who have an incredible amount of charisma. These are the kind of guys who get invited to be in 20 different people's weddings because 20 different people tend to think that they're best friends. And obviously they do not in turn want to have 20 people in their own weddings. But so I've looked at how is it that they're so charismatic? What is it that they do that people find so compelling? And then I've also met a few like national politicians, even some with policies I find not so good or healthy for the country, and also seeing those people as being charismatic, albeit from a much further distance. And then I've tried to figure out the commonalities of how that works, and then I'll plug that in. So it's not exactly a one-to-one, even though I will. Well, it's certainly not a one-to-one. It's not exactly using a real person. It's kind of abstracting from real people stuff that I see that I find terrifically interesting. And that's generally how it works for me to use real people. I know other writers will think of somebody that they really hate at work or something, and they'll plug that person in and have them be um, almost exactly alike. The writer William Somerset Maugham, who was just fantastic. He was often in trouble because he would plug in people into his short stories who were incredibly like people that he had met, and made some people very angry because he would be unsparing in his, after having been, say, a nice house guest, would be unsparing in how he depicted them in fiction and very identifiable. So that's what I do. Other people obviously do the latter approach, and apparently it works for them. JD Hudson says, I'll gladly trade away an earlier release for you to be able to release a conclusion you truly want. I know without a doubt that the wait will be more than worth it. Well, thank you for your faith. As every book of yours has been, thank you for communicating clearly about the release date, and we will try to be more patient. As for the questions, I'm curious about your writing process, particularly in tying all the books together. You mentioned how sometimes you find more themes to include, and you've posted about it about completely redoing chapters or adding new scenes. How do you keep track of all the clues and foreshadowing you have in the previous books, and how are you able to tie in the new ideas with what you've already published? Okay, process questions are, that was a very big question. Process questions are always a little squishy because my process is just, it's my process. I mean, maybe I do some things that you could abstract out with what other successful authors do to find what will work for you. But I don't say that my process is like the way to do it. And when authors do that, it really rankles because either I'm doing it wrong or they shouldn't be telling everybody to do it that way. I have tried to, I'll try to read books to see if I can refine my own process. Recently, I've been reading Daniel Pink's book, Win, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And in that, he looks at some some different studies and some good science about when people tend to be productive. And one of those things is that most people, for the majority of people, they do their best intense concentration early in the morning. Um, we tend to be terrible around noon and early afternoon. That's right about when I'm doing this video. So that's why it's not so good. And then they get better and better going into the evening, especially for creative work in the evening. So thus, what I do and what I've always done is I work every morning. And I try to work first on the things that are hardest. So the way I put it is big rocks first. So you figure out your main thing, the hardest thing you have to do, and you attack that right away, first thing in the morning. And then everything else that's less important, you get to as well as you can. For the themes question, I tend to attack things that worry me, and after I write the end, I go back and I attack the things that aren't good enough, or even as I'm going, I'll discover things. It takes me generally about 16 to 18 months to, no, about 16 months, 12 to 16 months to write a first draft, sometimes longer. And even as I'm writing that first draft, sometimes I'll just put a note, this doesn't work, fix it later, or look up this thing. Or, boy, I hate this name, come up with something later, because I'll be in the flow of a scene and I won't want to break the flow of the scene to, go look at Wikipedia, because you go start looking at Wikipedia and then you're going to be there for an hour. You're going to come back to the writing and you will have lost the thread. So when there's a detail or something that's just not working out, I'll write down a note about it. Sometimes I'll even write a note, like saying like, oh, I did establish this character like this, but that's not going to work. Let's change it. And then I'll keep going and I'll keep pushing toward the finish. Other times, maybe I'll have a bit of information or a line of dialogue that a certain character needs to hear. And I'll just mull that over, like, who is the best character for them to hear that from? And just a second, let me take a drink of water. Oh. And how can I have that affect, how would speaking that affect the character who says it? And what do I do if the best character for, say, your main character to hear something from is far away? Is it worth it to bring that person in? And can you get them across the world to say that? Should you do it? Also think about things in this particular series, like the whole series is about light and perception. That's built in from the ground up in the world building, in the magic, and so forth. I've got a character who's going colorblind. I've also got this magic with these layers of there's physics, the physical stuff of how the magic works, and then there's metaphysics. So in the series, I have physically a character with perception problems. Right, he's got a character who's going colorblind. But then I also have a character who's perceiving himself, sort of, metaphorically, in a way that's no longer true. So the perception problems are there in sort of metaphysical way. Kip starts the series as this fat kid, and he's internalized that. That's kind of who he is. That's part of his identity. But later in the series, he's been working out and he's been doing these things and he's been having adventures. He's not sitting around, eating pies in his village anymore. So he's physically changed, right? He's not a fat kid anymore, but he still sees himself that way, and his perception it's messed up. This causes me some difficulties or some fun, depending on how you want to see it, as we see his scenes almost exclusively through his eyes. So there's this interplay I do here to show the readers that he's changing, but he doesn't see it himself. This is kind of hard because you can easily make your character look stupid. And it's a tough problem because either I look stupid because here's this guy who's been working out all the time and not stuffing his face, at least as much as we can see, and he's still fat. And how can I mess that up? How could I miss that my character's body would have changed over the course of time? Or he looks stupid because he doesn't notice something that's clearly obvious. So trapped between fat and stupid is really a bad place to be. Um, so then once I noticed that I've already got existing in the series these themes of perception that are both internal and external, both metaphorical and literal. Um, I take it to the next place and I go, okay, this character is struggling with that. Do I have other characters who are struggling with perception? And of course I find out that they are, especially about themselves. And I realize I can draw that out a little bit. I can make it a little more plain. People are lying to each other all the time, and people are believing lies all the time, right? Just like in the real world. And even our memories lie to us because I was doing some reading about this. Our brains re-encode our memories. Every time you pull out a memory and look at it, when you put it back on the shelf, you change it. And so that happens for the first, I can't remember this quite offhand, for the first 7 or 11 years. And then after that period of time, the memory tends to solidify. But for a long time, if you're telling yourself lies about a memory, or you're casting yourself in the best possible light every time you think about something, when you put it back, it becomes a very, very different thing, especially if you're doing it over and over and over again. You'll notice this when you're sitting around with your college friends or high school friends, and you tell a story, that somebody tells a story, and you're like, that isn't what happened at all. That bears very little relation to actually what happened, and they believe it. They're not lying to you. Oh, I shouldn't say this. I'm gonna say it. No, I shouldn't say it. What just happened there? You saw a little stutter, and we edited out a mildly political, uh, but totally true and topical instance of that happening to someone. A politician who repeated a story that happened not to be real. It's happened on both sides of the aisle, actually. Um, but thematically, problems of perception become really natural ones for the story, for the series. So I'll go back and I'll look at whichever current book I'm working on and say, where can I draw some of these things out, and then I'll do that over and over with different things. It's it's a matter of uncovering things that already feel there, because they are things that are worrying you, that you wonder how that interacts, like how objective reality and our subjective experience of it interact, and truth and lies, how that interacts. That's obviously something that bothers me. It bothers me that somebody can tell me a story that isn't true, but they don't realize they're lying, even though they were there. So I'll find that those threads are throughout a particular throughout a book, not just in one plot line. How do I keep track? Wow, this is really going on. How do I keep track? It's of everything that I've been doing. It's super hard, and I do a lot of work on it. Some of it I just remember. I do a lot of work to fix errors, and then I have other people I say, did I mess things up? I'll have some beta readers now. I didn't earlier in my career. And still I know that I'll mess things up, and you get anywhere, I think, once you start to get north of a million words, and once you start to have, anytime you have more than 3 or 4 point of view characters, and I have quite a few more than that, you're gonna make little errors at least, and you just hope that you don't make ones that are really, really bad. And I think that finales are actually significantly more difficult, because you have to tie all those threads together. They all have to make sense, and hopefully they all have to pay off. It's like, well, why did you put that there in book 2? Um, and you want to be able to say, well, that was for a great reason, actually. And there's actually been some things I've been working on, like how do I work that in for like 2 books. Why did I do that thing back? I thought it was going to be topical, and then the story went a little different direction than I thought, and then now I need to work this guy back in some other way that hopefully is compelling, and so that's part of the work. When you take on epic fantasy, some of the things they're just difficult. That's the price you pay. Um, oh wow. And how do I tie in? How do I tie in new ideas that occur to me as I'm going along in a series? You know, if it takes 10 years, and my answer to that is just don't have new ideas. I just regurgitate the same thing over and over. Uh, no, I think writers are idea machines. If you want to be successful, you either have to write down all the ideas really fast. So this is your Philip K. Dicks, this is your Bradburys, this is your Sandersons, or you have to become an idea rejecting machine. That is, you toss out everything that doesn't fit. You have lots of great ideas, but you don't have time to write down everything that's interesting and wonderful and could make a great story, but you aren't the right person to write that story. There's this industry, so I can show this through a failure to be an idea rejecting machine. There's an industry joke that goes something like, "I suffered for my art, and now so will you." You'll learn all about something that just doesn't matter. Like, you're reading this book and you're like, why am I walking through a Roman villa learning about every room and every stone? And then later you find out, 10 pages of this. I'm not talking like a page to sort of set the setting. I'm talking like 10 pages of this. And later I found out the author had visited a Roman villa and found, just it was really fascinating, and like, good for him. That was really boring for me. So what you, or somebody will do ships and you're like, oh man, do I really need to learn everything about ships? Or do you just need to like realistically get me from point A to point B with enough stuff that it seems to fit, it seems to make sense? So that's like, there's real life and there's verisimilitude. What you want in your fiction is verisimilitude. You want enough stuff that it feels grounded, but you don't want to, when you're reading a police procedural, you don't want them actually to follow the police procedures, and then the thing takes 4 years for them to close a big case. And then there's all this stuff in real life that just doesn't matter. And there's like memorizing 400, police codes for things. You don't actually want to do that. You want to learn 1 or 2 or 3 new ones to you so that it feels like, oh wow, this is so authentic. You don't want it to be authentic. You want it to feel authentic. So it's kind of the iceberg approach. So, I learned a lot about medieval lens crafting. It's like a little tiny bit of that matters. And then other stuff I cheat on, like they didn't discover how to dye lenses in the real world, except for green. Green they learned fairly early on, and then other colors were much later. And it's like, you know what, that doesn't fit my world, which is basically 1600s kind of world setting. So I'm just gonna throw that stuff out and say, in my world, they figured out how to do this much earlier because the magic was dependent on that. So it was really important to them to figure that out. Fantastic. Verisimilitude. You have a little bit and then you go. However, huge caveat to this, which sucks because there's always caveats in writing. Some people will put in way too much information and somehow it works. Tom Clancy would do this. So Tom Clancy had these novels that he couldn't get them published. Nobody wanted to publish a novel, The Hunt for Red October, that had all this stuff about submarines. Like, dude, it's like 50 extra pages on submarines. Like, nobody cares how this works. But somehow they did. So if you're Tom Clancy, ignore that one. Or if you can make it work, because I think the only rule in writing, no, even this one doesn't hold. A really good rule that tends to hold, man, that's so weak. A really good rule that tends to hold is that the only rule is that people need to keep turning pages. If you can have people keep turning pages, however you do it, whatever you do to make them interested, you win. You're a big success. People keep turning pages. That's all that matters. The caveat, because I said there's a caveat even to that rule, is if you can make yourself famous enough for being really literary, you don't have to follow that either. Nobody actually reads Ulysses by James Joyce. You just like, man, this is so genius. People will feel good about me and think I'm smart if it's on my shelf. So if you can write a shelf book, more power to you. otherwise, for the rest of us, working class writers, uh, try the verisimilitude approach. So, idea rejecting machine. Last bit about this: if your ideas don't fit with, say, your new great thing that you've learned in the 10 years since you started your series about the medieval world, because you've been reading lots of great history books, you really want to include it, you got to see if it fits. Does it fit? And if it just doesn't fit, you go, man, that would have been cool if I'd known that 12 years ago. And then you throw it out. So, however, you are still one author. So there's new stuff that you might learn, and you might be like, you know what? I can make this work. This thing that I learned about how slavery actually worked in, ancient Greece, and I can imagine how it would have changed through, 1,000 years and 2,000 years, whatever. Um, I'm going to incorporate that. And it'll just be like, well, we looked at how things worked over here. But then, in my case with slavery, okay, slavery at the Cromeria works one way. And the slaves we've seen tend to be actually very privileged among the slave class. Here's how slavery works elsewhere, because this is how slavery actually worked, or there's lots of ways that slavery has worked throughout history, but this is a way that slavery worked at a certain time. Say with silver mines, which were, you know, unspeakably awful. So sometimes the same things, you can fit in new information, and it does fit because you're still the same person writing it, even if it's new information to you, and you can introduce it hopefully in a somewhat organic manner. Um, so last time I apparently did not sign off well, and that happened because I actually had an appointment, and realized I was literally late. So I just had to leave, and then we just cut off the thing. So that's it for this month. I hope you enjoyed this writing advice ramble. Quite a ramble. And hope you didn't miss my little political joke too much. Half of you probably didn't miss it at all. Have a great day, and we will talk next month. Should paste that onto the end.